The warp. What is the warp? The warp is the immaterium, the ether, the sea of souls, and it contains within it the realm of chaos. After more than 30 years in this hobby, my understanding of the immaterium is that it is an alternate reality, a separate extra-dimensional realm to real space, to the tangible universe, and it's made entirely of psychic energy. In fact, it's a tiny bit like fluidic space from Star Trek Voyager series, for those of you who know of it. If you don't, Google it, it's good, it's worth reading about. So, fluidic space was where there was an extra-dimensional reality, fluidic space, filled entirely with a form of organic fluid. So there was no emptiness, there was no actual space, it was all fluid everywhere. And you flew through the fluid, if you like, you existed within the fluid everywhere. Well, that is a bit like the immaterium, but you've got to replace the organic fluid with a soup of completely unique energy, referred to perhaps a bit unimaginatively as psychic energy. This psychic energy is, I think at least, most easily understood as simply magic. It is entirely its own thing. It isn't electromagnetism, it isn't gravitational force, it isn't weak nuclear force, or strong nuclear force, or some combination of these. It isn't bound by time, or explainable through quantum field theory, nor general relativity, and although it can and does certainly interact with all of these natural forces and theories, it is separate and unique in and of itself. Inside the infinite magic soup that is the immaterium, instead of there being subatomic particles, molecules, or celestial bodies, there are quintillions upon quintillions of things that in the real world we may think of as unreal, or without separate existence outside of human life. Intangible things like consciousness, souls, spirits, fragments of sentience, memories, emotions, dreams, nightmares, thoughts, concepts, experience, stray probabilities and random possibilities, fragments of time, and they're all gathering together in various ways and for various periods to become metaphysical objects in the warp, or places in the warp, or whirling storms, and even distinct entities and beings, and frequently and importantly, all of these things at the same time, and more, depending on who or what is perceiving it. The immaterium touches upon all points of real space, every particle in the physical universe, but at the same time it is also separated from the physical universe in a parallel extra-dimensional reality which has barriers that cannot be penetrated by any conventional means, nor by most unconventional means. The warp cannot even be perceived from real space under normal circumstances, although we have to note at this point that 40K and indeed 30K are way, way beyond anything that could be perceived as normal circumstances. If all real space, all the physical universe within our frame of reference, is a bubble of reality, then the warp exists around it and passes through it, generally without real space noticing or experiencing anything at all. In this picture, the warp could loosely be understood as the blackness around and within the bubble that is all physical reality, all the universe. This is why the warp can be used as a means of faster-than-light travel, because although the warp is inconsistent and random, without law, order, without consistent time or physical dimension or anything else, the parts of the immaterium that permeate real space, that permeate this physical universe, that bubble we see, also mirrors real space in some aspects. So the warp, where it touches real space, will have elements of time, elements of dimension, elements of momentum, and so on and so forth. It's not completely and utterly random where it permeates and touches upon real space. It's also worth noting that in their natural separated states, although the warp doesn't really affect real space that much, or at least prior to the opening of the Eye of Terror and the Great Rift, real space has always had a very dramatic effect on the warp, always, and we'll get into that a bit later in another video about chaos. So, you can use the warp as a means of faster-than-light travel. However, you could enter the warp at one point, only to exit it 1 billion years before you set out and in a parallel universe. That's not really helpful at all for anybody, but if you're traveling within the parts of the warp that intersect with and permeate the bubble of our reality, or the bubble of the 40K reality, it is a bit more likely that you can instead skim the shallows of the warp, where it passes through real space, and exit near your intended destination in a reasonable-ish period of time. If you have a point of certainty, like the Astronomicon, and if you have a navigator who can see the Astronomicon or sense it, and also see and sense the currents of the warp, then you can travel through the warp in a means that gets you to your destination faster than it would if you're traveling through real space. Because in the warp, time dilates and stretches, does all kinds of weird things, turns into a pretzel shape. So does distance and dimension. Obviously that's a cocktail for getting lost in time and space, but because you have your navigator who can see and sense these fragments of certainty within the uncertainty of the warp, and you can navigate by the fixed point of reality, that is the Astronomicon, then it's a relatively consistent form of faster than light travel. You can effectively travel many hundreds of times faster than the speed of light through the warp, although you could still be very unlucky and be caught up in a probability current that projects you out of the warp after centuries of travel, only to find yourself at your starting point before you even set out. That's still true, but at least with the Astronomicon and navigators and staying in the shallows of the warp, you minimize that risk. And with Geller fields, of course. But the Immaterium is much vaster than the parts of it that connect with the material universe. It is infinite. It connects to all universes, all realities, all dimensions, and goes even deeper still into utter random chaos of infinite unrealized potentials, complete impossibilities, far removed from any reality or possibility of reality. If you go back to our picture, if you enter the warp, then travel outside of where it passes through the bubble that is our reality, you will travel further and further away from any of the things that have leaked from our reality into the warp, further away from the reflection of our reality in the warp, so further away from fragments of time, fragments of distance, fragments of dimension, fragments of all the things that exist within our reality. You will travel further and further away from them and become more and more bound into complete non-time, non-dimension, the complete breakdown of anything you might consider any consistent laws. So the Immaterium is the source of all psychic powers, all magic, sorcery and miracles. And it is also the wellspring of chaos, the primordial annihilator and the primordial truth. It is the womb from which all gods and demons have sprung, and it is their habitat, their heaven, their hell. In fact, the terms chaos and the warp are often used interchangeably by those aware of their existence within the Imperium of Man. But I would very strongly propose that although chaos is made and found within the warp, all chaos is the warp, but not all warp is chaos. Similar to how all nightmares are dreams, but not all dreams are nightmares.